So there are a few people I see in my day-to-day life who watch my YouTube videos, a terrifying prospect to lesser folk, I know. As a result of this, I often get asked certain questions. Most common, outside of why am I weirdly attracted to you, is, "Golly gee, Sleepy, these moving pictures of yours are just great, by Jove. I just wish I knew what the swizzle sticks you were talking about. What's a tsukihame? Melty blood? Is that a type of medical condition? Why does the moon have a type?" And so on and so forth like that. I hear you, mon ami, or, anyone else who stumbled their fate-curious self here. Well, it's always fun to yap about things like an OVA spin-off of a spin-off for 40-plus minutes. I recognize that sometimes you gotta expand from such a narrow focus. I also know that the rumptuous tumult of Type Moon isn't exactly the easiest to get into. As it turns out, some folk weirdly don't want to read hundreds of hours worth of VNs to watch some nerd's YouTube videos. Sometimes they just want to compact only 1 or 2 hour-long YouTube video in a convenient to understand Berg-like format. God knows I personally do this with other franchises, so it's not like I'm one to judge. Whether you have no clue what a fate is, or if you're as parasocially attached to the scrungly routless girl in Tsukihime as I, this should at the very least be an entertaining watch, if not all around informative for all parties. I know I learned something in the research for this one for what it's worth. Covering everything from early Mahoyo to FGO, it's Iceberg time. Haven't done one of these in like 2 years, so should be fun. May your work shift, sleep, or other such activities be enhanced by listening to this. Though if you are actually watching the video and looking at the screen right now, here, check out this cool image I found. You can skip ahead to the first layer if you like. The following is just me citing my sources and going over the organization structure for this video. Second point first, I tried to order the entries by topic. For example, when we talk about Fate's Stay Night in the first layer, the following few entries will be relevant to that work. I think this helps the video flow and actually make sense, instead of, an entry like FSN being 3 pages in APA format going off about every event and character. First point second, I took basically all of the icebergs I could find online, added my own entries where necessary, mostly weird Tsukihime stuff, and created what is essentially a super cluster of most you could want to know about the Nasuverse. Hence the presumptuous title of calling it the most comprehensive. The icebergs I sourced are this one from u/Tohazore on Reddit, this one from GoGoPre on Tumblr, and finally this one from a now deleted user on Reddit. I went on Reddit for this video twice. I hope you all know I care about you. Last thing, this video is a Patreon request. Thank you once again to my lovely patrons, and if you would like to put up a topic for a video, while I can't promise it'll be a timely turnaround, I will dutifully get to it one day. I'm currently trying to get through that backlog at the moment, so hopefully y'all are looking forward to it. With all that out of the way, you all know what an iceberg is. I refuse to waste time on explaining it. Let's get into Tier 1. Tier 1, Near Side of the Moon. Fate Grand Order. Starting with the jump scare, huh? Fate Grand Order, or FGO, or FGO as I will alternate in calling it, is a mobile game on iOS and Android. Game is kinda generous though. The gameplay in this thing is either frustratingly obtuse or brain dead with no in-between. Not that gameplay matters to players, as the main feature of FGO is being one of the pioneers in the PNG gambling simulator genre known as gacha. Gold circles go burr, and I am sadly not immune. FGO is the most widely known Fate/Type Moon thing out there and regularly rakes in millions. Fate Go is also by far the largest Fate work, being regularly updated with visual novel-sized arcs every year-ish, with one just releasing the other day on the North American server as of this video going up. Though one shouldn't fret if you're looking to get into Fate and the idea of associating with endless gacha slap sounds repugnant. FGO's relevance to any work outside of itself is pretty much null. You'll have a scant reference or two, but otherwise it's a closed loop. Also, this is a verse that regularly references literally unreleased titles all the time. It's honestly more immersive to be blind if you ask me. You can likely tell by my tone that I'm not the biggest fan of FGO. I even said early on in my channel history that I'd never talk about it. Shows what you know past me, idiot. In all honesty, however, though I dislike it, As I said, I'm not immune. Stockholm Syndrome's a bitch, as it turns out. Though the game certainly tried my patience, I still look at my support list and get a kick out of how nice it is. Look at these fucking PNGs. Almost makes my wasted time feel validated. Almost. Add me, by the way, I got open slots. FGO Dojins. This is how a lot of people probably got into Fate. Dojin or doujinshi basically means individually published fan works, and the H doujinshi for FGO in particular number in the literal thousands. So much as scroll for 2 seconds on the devilish N, and you're going to see at least one character breasting boobily. If you're like me, you'll read these tales for academic purposes and want to know the story, nay, the literature behind why this character named Ryder is seemingly the one being ridden by a horse, which then leads to lifelong obsession. Could happen to any of us, it's a common thing, honestly. This entry is also in reference to how almost every writer on FGO other than Nasu had their start in writing Fate doujinshi. Not always the funny kind, mind you, but definitely filled with the same number of maids. Astolfo/Monster Energy. This refers to two things. First, to the twink femboy extraordinaire Astolfo, second most popular Fate character in existence and bane to all Republicans still in the closet. Astolfo is most well known for being an FGO, but should be most well known, in my opinion, for his inaugural work, Fate Apocrypha, in which he was cucked out of a romance with the MC by homophobic writers. A tragedy in motion to watch that show it is. This entry also refers to one certain cosplay of him that made the rounds on the internet a while back. Those who know, know. How that dude was packing girth only rivaled by a can of Monster, I'll never know, but always be appreciative. Cursed Gotcha. Another Fago-centric one. This is talking about the piss-poor pull rates on the banners in FGO. Terrible drop rate up indeed. From a 0.01 chance of pulling a 5-star to a 1% chance on rate up with a pity pull after 330 spins. At a cost of 3 SQ per $1 or $1 per spin, I think I'd rather buy the Garden of Sinners Blu-rays for that price. Pro tip from a professional FGO nerd, haters and detractors will stop you from living your best life and tell you to save SQ, but they're liars. Throw singles every chance you get. My two meloscenes from this most recent banner don't lie. Padoru. 'Tis the season. This video was started weeks before Christmas. This is a yearly tradition of sorts with Nero, yes, the Roman Emperor, post being hit with Nasu's HRT laser, loudly proclaiming her love for Christmas. Bit odd when you think about what Nero did historically to Christians, but ignore that. Padoru becomes popular every year around this time in the Fate circles. A kind of Mariah Carey for people who debate which fictional high schooler is the thickest, and while I could explain it, I'll just show you instead. Happy holidays, y'all.
走れソリよ風のように月見原をパドルパドル
Fate Stay Night. Finally, something good. Fate Stay Night is Type Moon's third visual novel and one that would rupture the VN world forevermore after. I'm not exaggerating to say that it is a genre-defining work. You see a trope you like in a modern VN, chances are it was inspired by this thing. It's harder to find VN authors who aren't inspired by it, in spite of it not getting an official English translation till this year. Even Dan Salvato of Doki Doki Literature Club fame has been on record to be a Type Moon head, likely because of this work. I know he's read Tsukihime at least, it'd be weird if he hadn't read Fate. FSN's general plot revolves around this really cool thing called a Holy Grail War. Seihai Senso, as the wannabe Japanese say. It's a war fought between 7 sets of magi and servants. Magi being the mage equivalent in the Nasuverse, being able to cast simple spells like strengthening objects or firing magical bullets. Whilst servants are renowned warriors from both the past and future summoned to the present to protect the magi and defeat the other servants in a competition for the Holy Grail. In simpler terms, Magic Man summoned Heracles to curb stomp King Arthur for a really cool cup. Gender bends. Nasu's good ol' HRT laser. This entry is in reference to a type moon proclivity to alter the gender of a character from their historical depiction. For the most well-known example, King Arthur is a woman in Fate, a change from historical canon which the ramifications of are actually pretty interesting. As Arthur, or Artoria, has to learn to accept parts of herself that she shunned during her reign as monarch of Britain. Pretty compelling part of Fate's Stay Night, honestly. Other gender bends include colorful characters like Van Gogh, the aforementioned Nero, and I'd be remiss not to mention the darling of Figo, Leonardo da Vinci. Twice over, even. Can you guess which one Fate fans thirst over more? Because it's not this one. Merlin penis magic. So, in Arthurian legend, King Arthur has a son, but as previously stated, King Arthur, or Saber in the Fate universe, is AFAB. That kid of Arthur's, Mordred, depicted here seemingly after being hit with the same laser that claimed her father, still exists in Fate lore, however, and it's not like the king ever got pregnant. I've read a lot of King Arthur mythos, but impreg wasn't in any tale that I can recall, unfortunately. Only conclusion being that Merlin, devilish wizard that he is, helped Saber get it up to produce said heir. Pretty sure it's even outright stated in a drama CD, Garden of Avalon or something like that. Chicks with dicks. Dixie chicks, even. More like Fate Stay Woke, am I right? Jesus Christ. Emiya Shiro. This is the main character from Fate's Stay Night. Emiya Shiro, put simply, is one of our boys. He's a bit of a loose cannon with his mannerisms and just in general, always flying off the handle in the situations that should get him killed. But he's got a heart of gold and has been through more in 17 years than most people do in 2 or 3 lifetimes. He's got a little perspective, in other words. It's hard to condense everything about Shiro down into a succinct sentence or two. He's a very nuanced lad. On the surface, one could, and some do, describe him as a dull boy who magically lives through getting his guts rearranged, is weird about women, and seemingly only has the character trait of saying, "Nah, I'd win," and then actually winning. But under that surface, there is a literal iceberg level of things to learn about him. He's always doing his best and learning to overcome his biggest op, himself. Shiro's a quirked up sword boy who wants to be a hero of justice, and I for one believe in him. Truly one of the best ones to ever do it. There's a reason he has a day based on him. More on that in a lower entry. Fate Route. This is the fittingly named first route in Fate's Stay Night. It revolves around Saber / Artoria and Shiro's adventures through the Grail War. In this route, the two team up with Ren Tosaka, an honor student and senior mage to Shiro whose existence helped define the tsundere archetype. In the process of them doing so, I've been told, things happen, such as Saber and Shiro forming a relationship, Shiro getting kidnapped by a little German girl claiming to be his sister, and at one point near the end, this gold-clad prick shows up demanding to be a part of a cuckold. He's a little weird in a bad way, but we stand Gilgamesh in this household. The Fate route is a pretty good introductory route, probably the best paced out of the 3 main Fate Stay Night stories, if not the Nasuverse selection of Vians in general. Some interesting plot threads are always unraveling, characters learn alongside the readers in a non-preachy way, nothing ever goes too deep as to leave folks alienated, and it has one of the best endings this weird mushroom called Nasu has ever written. Just finished up my reread a few days ago and damn, still hits. UBW. Or Unlimited Blade Works is the second route in Fate's Stay Night. Despite having Ren Tosaka on the icon for it, don't be fooled. This is not a Ren Tosaka route. She gets enough screen time in the other stories to make up for it, trust me. No, this is a Shiro Emiya route. Ren is simply here sometimes for fun as the main ally to Shiro, taking the role of Saber, kinda. UBW dives into the faults with Shiro's hero of justice dream. He is, quite literally, confronted with all that's wrong with his way of thinking, and he has to find a way not to crumble under the weight of his own expectations. He can't save everyone in the trolley problem and takes that personally. Shiro is by far the most broken in terms of ability on this route. Him constantly pushing his limits and striving for more pushes him in strides towards actualization of his goals. It's by far the most inspiring story in Stay Night. It's the kind of story I think about and then go write or edit for hours at a time. It's a really good motivator. Heaven's Feel. Heaven's Feel is the third and final route in Fate Stay Night. Its main plot revolves around Mato Sakura and, more importantly, the best character in the visual novel, Ilya, the strange German girl I mentioned earlier in passing. That basic-ass statement is all I'm gonna say about it because this story is, by far, the most emotional and compelling in Stay Night. Going in blind is the only way for the story beats to really gut punch ya. I know I personally spontaneously combust into water every time I so much as envision the notes for Die Lorelei in my head. If you know, you know. Fate Zero. A prequel series to Fate Stay Night that has a dubious canonicity to the latter depending on who at Type Moon you ask. Fate Zero is, if not the UBW adaptation, the most popular Fate anime. Fate Zero takes place 10 years prior to Stay Night during the Fourth Holy Grail War. It has a cavalcade of characters who take the helm, but the main-ish one is Kuritsugu Emiya, adoptive father of Shiro. Kuritsugu is a character that was only ever talked about in Stay Night, so to see him further explored here in this prequel work is... well, it probably should have been left to interpretation if it was going to be handled like this. Like, listen to this choice quote he says, "This fast food, filled with a sense of slaughter, is more suited to my taste." Real quote. Granted, that's from the light novel original that the anime was based on. Even the showrunners couldn't put that shame to air. That's still how he's characterized, and that's the general tone of the story. Overly dark to the point I honestly find it kind of funny. I unironically think Ryunosuke, the psychotic evil knife guy, is the only character in this show that fits the tone. At least he hams it up and makes it kind of funny. Like, hell yeah bro, kill those kids, go off. I know what I've said so far in this entry is probably pretty contentious. Zero has some ardent defenders. Some people love Fate Zero. And, you know, despite all I've said, like, it's definitely worth a watch, I think. Like, once, but all jokes aside, its pacing kills me. Why are 3 episodes spent posturing on a dock, Mr. Urobuchi? Please explain yourself. Banquet of Kings. This is probably the most infamous scene from Fate Zero. It involves Iskander, or Alexander the Great for those who aren't pretentious, Gilgamesh, and Saber/Artoria. In this scene, the 3 debate the nature of what it means to be a king, and by that I mean they belittle Saber for half the episode because reasons. Some people critique Saber's characterization in Zero pretty harshly as out of pocket for how she should be based on Stay Night, and I agree. She does some weird stuff in this one that you just have to watch after Stay Night to understand fully. There are many reasons as to why the writing in Zero is off like this and why Saber gets it so brutally in the Banquet of Kings scene in particular, but personally, I just think Gen Urobuchi, the writer of Zero, like, hates women or something. Speaking of which, Gen the Butcher. Okay, so I'm only half joking. Old Gen does have a certain proclivity when it comes to writing women in his work though, not gonna lie. How he wrote Madoka Magica is still a mystery to me. I mean, he got the nickname Gen the Butcher for a reason. This image on screen in particular comes from a visit old Gen made to France. This was a fan-made sign that he saw and presumably said true to. I don't really have anything more to add in terms of commentary, but I am gonna read out some of my favorite Gen Urobuchi quotes so you all really get a feel for his particular flavorings. In 2013, at a Nitro Plus Q&A panel, Gen Urobuchi was asked the following questions, which he answered. Question: is Homura in love with Madoka? Answer: probably. In the first draft, I unthinkingly named her Satsuki and ended up getting punished by the original author. I had totally forgotten that Satsuki was Sachin's real name, or rather, I had forgotten that Sachin even had a real name at all. To all the Yumizuka Satsuki fans around the world, I humbly beg your forgiveness. No, fuck you, Gen. I'm sorry. Getting back to Al-Qaeda. The desire to lead... the desire to lead the world in the right direction is not wrong in itself. The decision Madoka, the main character, makes at the end of the series is the result of her not wanting to deny the fact that the magical girls held hope. I still can't believe this motherfucker compared Madoka Magica to Al-Qaeda. God, that quote. Okay, one more. Some people might get angry at this, but sometimes I really wonder, what is originality anyways? Personally, I don't believe originality exists at all. Even if I'm not conscious of it, I know I'm copying off something. To me, all past works I've experienced are like sperms, and I'm the egg. And what I write is our children. Anyways, I've just been raped so many times that I have no idea who the real father is. Kanoko Nasu responds. Urabuchi then replies, "No, really. That's what I think is really amazing about your work, Nasu-san. One parameter is the amount of 2D works you have at Comiket. That's a parameter I can believe in. Just how much work you have out there. I really believe Tsukihime is impregnating a lot of people. Honestly, I just can't compete with that." Honestly, I take it all back. This is the smartest man I've ever heard in his life. He was kind of spitting on that last one. Jeez, real cartoon character. Real ass cartoon character. I can't believe he's real. There are other choice quotes out there. Please go and search them up at your leisure. Everything this man says in an interview is a gem. Ufotable anime adaptations. So the animation studio Ufotable has made anime adaptations of Fate Zero, Unlimited Blade Works, and Heaven's Feel. If you want to watch them, I'm not gonna stop you. There are readily available and convenient ways of going through Fate. But let it be known that when it comes to Fate anime, this is a Studio Dean appreciation channel. Ufotable puts out some real slop in comparison. UBW has its moments, but let's not even talk about the tragedy that is the Heaven's Feel films. Kinoku Nasu. I just realized I did Gen Urabuchi before literally the guy that came up with Fate, or anything else on this berg, actually. Speaking of, this is the guy. Kinoku Nasu is a prolific writer when it comes to Japanese media, responsible for works like Fate Stay Night, Tsukihime, Kara no Kyokai, and the only good parts of Fate Grand Order. His writing style is, in 2 words, deceptively enchanting. Out-of-context scenes like the infamous This Chair and Tsukihime scene playing in the background right now are funny, but in the moment, the red text and repeated lines elicit feelings of hazy insanity. It really puts you in the place of its protagonist. There's a reason I keep coming back to the Mushroom's work no matter how much time passes. He truly is one of a kind, for better and for worse. Also, Kinoku Nasu translates to mushroom eggplant, which if you didn't know makes his writing pseudonym a dick joke. Nasuverse. This is what this berg is about. It is the interconnecting worlds and systems that one Kinoku Nasu has thought up and put to pen. Most everything Type Moon has released follows the rules and setting of this universe. Some characters even overlap here and there. Each story usually takes place in its own little world separate from the other stories, but all have the same underlying world logic. Think of it like a D&D variant crafted with a bunch of house rules. One campaign would be Fate Stay Night, then you'd wipe the slate clean for the next session and do a Tsukihime campaign. I've played D&D like twice, so if that's not how it works, oops. Takashi Takeuchi. The main artist for Type Moon since its founding. Takeuchi has been at it so long that you can literally see his evolution as an artist pretty strikingly. I mean, just look at this character named Arcoade and how she's been drawn over the years. Insane change. Personal preference, but I wish he kept at the post-Suki pre-Fate style. Some really good pieces in that brief era of art. Saber faces. Not all change and development is good. One of the main critiques of Takeuchi's art is his faces. Specifically that he draws a lot of faces that look exactly like Saber from Fate Stay Night, and yeah, that's pretty much true. However, if you look closely, you will see that the majority of this critique is levied at his drawings in FGO. You know, the gotcha slop game, in which he's designed like a good chunk of the servants, a lot of which literally are the same character in different fits, to be fair. If I were forced to do so much for what should be a quick cash cow, I'd probably start phoning it in at some point too. I personally think this is pretty much the case and say that in confidence, as Takeuchi's work in the latest Type Moon release, Tsukihime Remake, It's honestly phenomenal. Hi, if the audio sounds different in this entry, that's because I'm recording it in the middle of editing and in a different place. As it turns out, the original version of this entry was incredibly yappy. It legit sounded like one of those off-lane TikToks. If you know, you know. As a result, I have elected to rewrite and re-record this entry so that it actually somewhat makes sense. If you're curious about how the original version of this entry sounded, I'm going to include it as a kind of blooper at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. It's a trip. Anyways, shall we? Tsukihime. Finally, my beloved Tsuki. Tsukihime is the first visual novel and commercial work released by Type Moon. It is also, in my unbiased opinion, the greatest visual to ever novel. Tsukihime follows Tono Shiki as he gets called back to his childhood home after being away for a decade. TLDR in that whole situation, Shiki got into a really bad accident as a kid, and so his pops said, "I don't need some anemia-riddled sister kisser in my house," and sent him away. But starting the story proper, his old man has bit it, and so Shiki gets called back home. He has nostalgic yet mixed feelings about returning, and from that onset, the story follows one of two main paths, each with different routes. First is the near side of the moon, wherein Shiki gets taken over by a homicidal impulse to murk this white woman. No matter how many times I rewrite that line, it still sounds so fucking crazy out of context. Anyways, thankfully, no one was really hurt, as said woman was a vampire named Arkawade. But, you know, Shiki still feels pretty guilty about the whole thing and decides to help her with her chore. Her chore just happens to be hunting down some DA motherfucker named Roa, which is a whole thing. With that goal in mind, though, they set off and the near side of the moon commences. The second story path, the far side of the moon, sees Shiki taking a less active role in the whole Arkawade Roa debacle. He doesn't even meet Ark this time around, actually. No, instead, Shiki spends the majority of the story making up for lost time with his loved ones. Looks and synopses can be deceiving, however, as the far side of the moon is, far and away, better than the near side could ever hope to be. Seriously, events unfold that unravel Shiki's mind until it's almost nothing. It can be hard to read sometimes, but it's just so encapturing all the same. As with Fate's Heaven's Feel earlier, I don't want to go into the plot or spoil anything. It's one of those things you really gotta go into blind or not at all. If you're not interested in reading, I have made several videos about Tsukihime in the past, covering every route. Most notably for the far side, the last two maid-centric routes, which, though a dated video, I am still extremely proud of to this day. Link to a playlist with all my Tsuki videos below. Be warned though, some of them are very old and I have grown a lot as a video maker since. Still don't know what I was thinking with that Karno Kyokai footage I included. 5 routes. There are 5 routes in Tsukihime. In order from worst to best, we got Ciel, Hisui, Arkawade, Akiya, and finally, the best, Kohaku. If you've read Tsukihime, that is a very contentious order, but I live my truth. Each route individually is top tier, mind you, except Ciel, her route sucks. Shiki Tono, aka our boy, the main character in the Tsukiverse and a genuine contender for the best character this mushroom's ever penned. Shiki is someone, like the work he's from, I can and have talked about endlessly. He's a very sentimental lad, though he'd never let it show on the outside. He's got a fragile view of life, in no small part due to his affliction, his mystic eyes of death perception, an ability/curse that lets him see the seams of everything, and lets him cut said seams as effortlessly as waving a knife through the air. The seams pain him to look at, and were it not for the glasses he wears that blocks them out, he thinks he would have lost it years before the story even starts. How the story of Tsukihime delves into the character of Shiki, his eyes, his estrangement from his family, and his fragile worldview, and even why he has the awful urges he does, really is a wonder. I call him our boy for a reason. Melty Blood. This is a sequel VN to Tsukihime focusing on the Knight of Tartary, but is more widely known for the fighting game attached to it, which has become one of the most popular fighting game series ever made. Melty Blood type Lumina and Actress Again are staples at any FGC meetup to this day, and are really fun games to play. It's a pretty neat series, and like with most things Tsuki related, I've actually made a video series on Melty, link below. Need to actually finish that one up though. It's been like a year since the last part. Oops. Meme Graveyard. The following are really dead memes from the Nasuverse community, most of which were never really funny even at inception. At least I think so. I'm gonna go through these rapid fire and off the cuff because they are really not worth diving into like the other entries in this Iceberg. Minor spoilers ahead for everything, doesn't really matter though. People die when they are killed. Stray out of context screenshot from the Dean anime used to deride Fate as a really stupid series. Mana transfer. Or, essentially, coitus. In the original Fate visual novel, the one with the funny content, mana transfer is basically equated to transferring fluids, for lack of a better term. Worm jokes. There's a character in Fate known as Mato Sakura, and in Fate Zero, there is a specific scene where she is thrown into a worm pit. And later on in Fate Stay Night, there are also references to certain worms that go inside her body and like do some really fucky-wucky stuff. Basically, people will make jokes about this and deride her character, but these have never really been funny. It's like making fun of someone's disability. You're walking into hell. Yet another stray screen cap from the anime. This is used in all sorts of context, and of all the ones on this list is probably the only one that has any actual staying power. I mean, hell, I've used it in this very video, so. Does it deserve to be here? Yes, it's very overused, but it's definitely the least offensive one here. Pretty funny sometimes, I ain't gonna lie. Unlimited budget works. This is in reference to Ufotable's seemingly endless budget for the Fate adaptations, probably from evading taxes. Lancer died. So in Fate Zero and Stay Night, the Lancer class servant has the proclivity to die in really embarrassing and off-kilter ways. This was then poked fun at and expanded upon in a show called Carnival Phantasm, in which Lancer died every single episode. It's basically just a cheap one-off gag, used over and over again. It loses its punch rather quickly, in my opinion. Carnival Phantasm, just the whole show. Like with the last entry, Lancer died, Carnival Phantasm as a whole is filled with jokes that just replay endlessly, repeat on themselves, and you get a few gems here and there, but honestly, the show's kind of tiring. It's like the Fate subreddit made into an anime, and if that's your style of humor, go off, you're gonna fucking love this thing. Me personally, I could take it or leave it. Isn't it sad, Sachin? So in Tsukihime, there's a character named Satsuki Yumizuka who doesn't have a route in spite of a slathering of foreshadowing implying that she should. It was even a canned route and was intended to be released a year or two after Tsukihime, but it just never happened. So isn't it sad Sachin is used as a general term to describe things that never happened or just didn't turn out like you expected? Before Tsukiri actually got a trailer back in 2020, many people, and I do mean many people, myself included, would post screen caps of the original Tsukiri announcement trailer from all the way back in 2012 with the caption, "Isn't it sad, Sachin?" or something to that effect. It's quite a bit played out, and a lot of people don't use it anymore, but it is worth mentioning for the meme graveyard segment. Giguk. Giguk has made a few videos on Fate that really overcomplicate the series. Most famously, a video trying to explain where exactly you start Fate. A lot of people in the community think this is unfair. Fate does have a bajillion entries, this is true. However, like with any series, if you just look up the release order, if you just look up a timeline of when stuff came out, you can generally follow that and be pretty safe and sound. Where do I start? This is kind of leapfrogging off of the last entry, but it's just as poignant to be its own thing because if you look up where to start the Fate series, you will see a myriad of charts trying to pinpoint with rocket scientist precision where exactly you should start the Fate series. It's kind of a tired joke, but if you want to know my personal favorite variation on it, and it's still kind of a lame one, check out this image, really funny, really cool. Watch order. This is kind of different from the last one because if you refuse adamantly to read, there is kind of a weird watch order for Fate. Personally, I'd say start with the Dean anime from back in 2006, but if that looks yucky and doesn't really appeal to your sensibilities, you're probably best starting off with UBW. A lot of people will tell you to start with Zero, but they're wrong. They're wrong. Okay, here's another anime-centric one. The Tsukihime anime doesn't exist. Back in 2003, there was a funny little anime series put to air called Shingetsuten Tsukihime. It was 12 episodes and a very, very loose adaptation of the Tsukihime visual novel, including elements from all over the place. Largely, it is an adaptation of the Arcade route, but in practice, it uses elements from every single route and stitches them together in a really incoherent mess. In addition with looking ugly, having some weird VA choices regardless of if you're watching in English or Japanese, it led to a lot of people in the community joking about it not existing, as something so bad it should simply be forgotten. What the haters don't want to tell you though is that the Tsukihime anime does exist, and though it's very, very scuffed, it's alright. The hate for it's definitely overblown. As far as adaptations go, it's not really a good adaptation, but like, it'll do in a pinch. It's funny to watch if you've read Tsukihime, I will say that much. Okay, that's the end of the little meme graveyard segment. I can only hope that was somewhat coherent. Let's get on to the next entry. Timelines. The Nasuverse is a bit of an oddball when it comes to timeline antics. Originally pre-FGO, Karno Kyokai, Tsukihime, and Fate Stay Night were all vaguely in the same timeline, all taking place in different places in Japan during different years. K&K was always kinda separate from the two, but Tsukihime characters and events have many references within Fate and its sequel Hollow Ataraxia. It was a very loosely tied together timeline, but the idea of Fate and Tsukihime happening in the same world is kinda neat considering they both operate on the same logic. Ditto goes to Tsukihime and Karno Kyokai, both the mentor figures from each respective work literally being sisters. But all this was thrown out around 2015 with the release of FGO. FGO brought with it a whole new timeline to Nasuverse canon. Nowadays, everything is in its own little box, Tsukihime is its own thing, Stay Night is its own thing, and so on and so forth. One of the biggest reasons for this change is that FGO draws from literally every Nasuverse work, and if you continue with the loose timeline of K&K to Tsuki to Fate, it gets more than a little messy when you start to include other works like Apocrypha, which is in an entirely different world where Stay Night literally cannot take place. What's canon to the main timeline and what's not, that question sucked to answer, and so everything got sectioned off into their own little box. Long story short, there are too many works and too many changes to the lore in even Tsuki, FSN, and K&K for a consistent timeline. Seriously, Karno Kyokai kept getting chapters up to like 2013, and then Tsukihime 2 was one of those things Nasu promised, planned, and though canon, was never released. Quick little aside, I hope you're not sick of hearing that Tsukihime 2 song and dance as we go on. Stuff like that's gonna crop up a lot more. Geez, I swear Nasu is less consistent with works and uploading stuff than I am. If you think my upload schedule is scuffed, you're right, but you know, I'm inspired by my heroes, or something like that. Anyways, that's the end of Tier 1 and the end of this first video. I hope it's been an enjoyable time. I know I've certainly had a lot of fun working on it. Expect Tier 2 up soon. It's already recorded, so it's just a matter of editing on that front. I decided to split it up because Tier 1 on its own runs over a half hour, and Tier 2 itself pushes 40 minutes, both really solid video links on their own. My original plan was to release them in Junction, but as I was editing, I realized that such a long editing process would probably have this video coming out in February, and I just didn't want to do that. I'm pushing to make way more videos this year than last, low bar, I know, and if some cuts here and there aid and abet that process, I'll make them. Only real issue is that some things in Tier 1 tie into the next, and to anyone who noticed that, I humbly ask for your patience. Type Moon is a tangled web, but that's one of the reasons I personally love it. If you liked the video, please do the usual YouTube thing of liking, subscribing, and commenting your favorite era of Type Moon. If you really, really like the vid, consider visiting my Patreon to support me financially. There are a few goodies in it for you, like a monthly podcast and giving suggestions for videos. I can only do YouTube in between my night shifts at the crushing factory, so any support is greatly appreciated. See you all next video, and see you all next tier. Afterwards, feeling insanely guilty and teaming up with said woman, whom is actually a vampire named Arcoade as it turns out,